At the edge of a cliff, overlooking a gray and unforgiving sea, stands the Abbey of Saint-Rémiel. For 100 years, its broken towers have howled with the wind, mimicking the organ pipes of a long-dead cathedral. No one has dared to enter since the night the choir went silent. Legend says that on their final night of service, as the monks sang the Requiem, the music grew so powerful that it became eternal, trapped within the very stones of the abbey, echoing through its walls forever. Those few who ventured inside spoke of faint, ghostly harmonies that would tighten around the soul until it simply stopped beating. Dr. Aline Deschamps, a professor of sacred music, wasn't one for curses. She believed in acoustics, not ghosts. So when an unsigned letter penned in crimson ink invited her to study the abbey, she accepted immediately. It read, "The voices are trapped in the vaults. Help them find rest." Intrigued, she arrived on a stormy evening, the sea crashing below and gulls circling like lost souls. Her only welcome came from a stooped caretaker, Brother Henri, a man of few words. As he led her to her room, he murmured, "The choir is waiting." "Waiting?" she asked. He turned, his eyes shadowed. "For you to listen." The abbey was magnificent, even in its ruin. Stone arches stretched towards the sky, and frescoes had faded into ghostly outlines. But the air was unnaturally still, heavy with a silence that felt wrong. Aline clapped her hands, expecting the sharp retort of an echo. Instead, the sound was swallowed, and in its place, something else emerged. Faint, harmonic notes drifting from the choir loft. It was a hymn she knew all too well, the Dies Irae, the Day of Wrath. Her heart pounding, she climbed the winding stone stairs, recorder in hand. The choir stalls at the top were empty, the music stands coated in a thick layer of dust. Yet the music persisted, filling the air like an unseen breath. She raised her recorder, its red light a small beacon in the gloom, and pressed the button. The device flickered once, then died, and in that same instant, the music stopped. Later, over a simple dinner of bread and wine, Brother Henri finally shared the full legend. 100 years ago, he began, his voice low. On the eve of Saint Rémiel's feast, the choir sang through the night. They were led by Father Sebastian, a man of great faith, but even greater pride. He took a slow sip of wine. They wished to create a song so perfect it would reach heaven itself, but something else heard them first. Aline leaned forward. "What do you mean?" Henri's gaze drifted toward the chapel doors. When dawn came, the congregation found the entire choir dead. Their mouths were open as if still singing, but their eyes were black, filled with a sound that could not escape. Aline managed a nervous laugh. "That's just a superstition." Henri's gaze hardened. "Then tell me, madame, if it is only superstition, why does the music still play when no one stands in the loft?" That night, sleep was impossible. Aline returned to the chapel, drawn by an academic curiosity that now felt more like a fatal compulsion. She examined the brittle sheet music left in the stalls. The title read, Cantus Eternus, the Eternal Song. The composition was unlike anything she had ever seen. It was a musical paradox, with overlapping harmonics, impossible chord progressions, and notes that defied the very laws of natural pitch. As she traced the staves with her finger, a single drop of moisture landed on the back of her hand. She looked up. The high vaulted ceiling was bone dry, but then she saw them, thin lines of condensation hanging in the air, vibrating like otherworldly strings. The air itself seemed to hum with a latent power. And then, she heard it again, not just music, but faint whispers woven between the notes. "Finish the song. Finish what we could not." The next day, she set up her equipment: sensitive microphones, oscilloscopes, resonance meters. She was going to capture this phenomenon, dissect it, understand it. When she played back the fragments she'd managed to record earlier, the abbey itself seemed to tremble. Her devices registered frequencies far beyond the range of human hearing, the sound waves forming bizarre rhythmic patterns on her screens, like voices speaking just beneath the surface of the music. She slowed the recording, isolating the strange frequencies. The words became chillingly clear. "Save us." But as that plea faded, another voice overlapped it, deeper, resonant, and cold. No salvation, only harmony eternal. And in that moment, every light in the abbey blew out, plunging her into absolute darkness. That night the storm ceased, and the full moon poured silver light through the shattered roof of the chapel. Unable to resist, Aline went back. The ancient organ pipes gleamed faintly. She sat at the bench, her fingers hovering over the keys, and pressed one. The note didn't fade. It swelled, growing in power, until other notes rose from the very stones to join it, forming a chord that filled the vast space. And then, they appeared. In the choir loft, translucent figures in robes began to materialize, their mouths open in a silent, agonizing song, their faces flickering like dying candle flames. At their head, Father Sebastian stepped forward. His eyes were black voids of nothingness, but his smile was serene, beatific. "We reached heaven," he whispered, his voice a rustle of dry leaves. "But heaven did not want us." Aline was frozen, a statue of terror and fascination. Sebastian extended a ghostly hand. "You understand music," he said, his voice weaving into her mind. "You can finish the Cantus Aeternus. You can free us." Every instinct screamed at her to run, to flee this cursed place. But a deeper part of her, the academic, the obsessive, was anchored to the spot. "Show me," she whispered. The choir began to sing. The sound wasn't loud, but it filled her head, vibrating through her teeth, her bones, her blood. She was shown visions, the monks in their final performance, singing with bleeding throats as their very souls were torn from their bodies, conducted by a joyous Sebastian as they were pulled into the void. The harmony deepened, and she felt it, a perfect, silent emptiness that demanded completion. Aline raised her hands, not of her own will, but as if guided by invisible strings. And then, she sang. Her voice trembled at first, then found its place in the ghostly chorus, growing stronger, purer, until she could no longer tell where her sound ended and theirs began. The abbey shook. The air shimmered with an impossible energy. Just then, Brother Henri burst through the doors shouting her name. The wave of sound struck him, and he dropped to his knees, blood streaming from his ears. Above him, Aline began to glow, levitating gently as the spectral choir surrounded her. Sebastian smiled. Perfect harmony. Aline's final note pierced the air, a sound of pure crystalline beauty. And then, there was only silence. At dawn, villagers found Brother Henri wandering the cliffs, half blind and whispering fragments of a forgotten hymn. The abbey was utterly still. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the smell of old stone. There was no trace of Dr. Aline Deschamps. All that remained was her digital recorder, lying on the floor beside the organ. When the authorities played it back, they heard nothing but static. But if you turn the volume all the way up and listen with all your being, you can hear it. Beneath the hiss, faint voices, hundreds of them, singing a slow, mournful, and endlessly repeating melody. Today, the Abbey of Saint-Rémiel is closed to the public, its gates sealed. Yet on quiet nights, hikers on the cliffs swear they can hear faint music rising from the ruins, a hymn with no beginning and no end, carried by the wind over the waves. And if you listen long enough, they say you'll notice one voice stands out. Clearer, higher, unmistakably human. A woman's voice, weaving between the dead, forever singing the final, perfect note. Thank you for joining me on this chilling tale. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more mysteries from the shadows. Stay curious and stay safe. From above, the lake was shaped like an eye, reflecting the sky so perfectly that the villagers called it l'œil de Dieu, the eye of God. But when the wind fell silent and the surface went glass still, they whispered it didn't reflect the heavens at all. They said it looked inward, into the souls of those who stared for too long. At the farthest edge of the water stood a single house, once white, now gray and sagging. No one had lived there for 20 years. Not since Elena Rousseau had vanished. When Claire Rousseau received the letter, she almost didn't open it. The handwriting was shaky, the paper yellowed and thin. It read, "Claire, my dear, it's time you come home. The lake remembers what we forgot. Aunt Mireille." Claire hadn't been back to Saint-Avril since she was 16. Her mother had disappeared in that lake when she was just a child, her body never found. Her father left soon after, unable to bear the weight of the whispers that followed them everywhere. But something in the letter's final line sent a chill down her spine. The lake remembers. So, against her better judgment, she went back. The house at the end of the lake was smaller than she remembered. Its roof sagged like tired shoulders, its windows clouded with a film of dust and time. But as she pushed open the creaking door, a familiar scent drifted out, damp wood and dried lavender. Her aunt sat by the window, wrapped in heavy shawls despite the mild air. Her eyes were pale and distant, fixed on the water. "You came," she said softly, her voice a dry rustle. "The lake's been waiting for you." Claire forced a smile. "It's just water, Aunt Mireille." The old woman's gaze didn't waver. "No, it's her. The lake kept her when it couldn't keep me." That night, Claire dreamed of her mother standing waist-deep in the cold, dark water, her black hair floating like seaweed, whispering Claire's name through the ripples. The next morning, determined to shake off the unease, Claire explored the attic. Dust motes hung like a fine mist in the shafts of sunlight. She found old boxes filled with her mother's things, letters she never sent, charcoal sketches of the woods, and an old film camera. Inside, she found a roll of undeveloped film. Curiosity getting the better of her, she took it into town, to the one dusty shop that still handled film processing. The old man at the counter took one look at the negatives and went pale. "These were taken the week before your mother vanished," he murmured, handing them back. "You should look, but maybe not alone." Later, Claire sat by the lake to study the developed photos. The first few were simple: trees lining the shore, the weathered wooden dock, her mother smiling into the lens. But the last image, taken at dusk, made her blood run cold. In it, her mother stood on the dock, and behind her, perfectly captured in the lake's reflection, was another face. A pale, drowned version of herself, with wide, terrified eyes and a mouth open in a silent scream. That night, the house groaned and creaked as if settling into a deep, troubled sleep. Rain tapped against the roof, a slow, hypnotic rhythm. Claire lay awake, listening to the old house breathe. Then she heard it, a soft humming, coming from outside. It was her mother's lullaby. Drawn by the sound, she rose and went to the window. The lake shimmered faintly in the gloom. The reflection of the moon rippled, then smoothed over, and she saw her mother's face again, smiling sadly from beneath the surface. "Mom," she whispered, her breath fogging the glass. A pale hand broke the surface, its fingers reaching toward her. Claire stumbled back, her heart pounding in her chest. When she dared to look again, the image was gone. But the window pane was wet, dripping with cold lake water. Her aunt refused to speak of what Claire had seen. Instead, she handed her a small, worn leather book. "Your mother wrote this before she disappeared," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I found it floating near the dock." The entries began normally enough, notes about the house, sketches of birds, but they soon turned strange. June 11th. The lake listens when I talk. It hums back. A few days later, June 15th, I dropped a mirror in the water today. The reflection didn't break. It smiled. The final entry was terrifying. June 20th. She wants me to stay. She says the reflection isn't mine anymore. Claire closed the journal, shivering. "She was ill," she whispered, trying to convince herself. Mireille just shook her head slowly. "No, dear, she was claimed." Determined to prove this was all grief and old superstitions, Claire went to the dock at sunrise. Mist hovered over the lake like a phantom's breath. She knelt at the edge and peered into the water. Her own reflection stared back. Same tired eyes, same tangled brown hair. "See?" she whispered to the empty air. "Just me." But as she watched, her reflection blinked, a split second before she did. Then, it smiled. A slow, deliberate, chilling smile, while her own lips remained perfectly still. Claire gasped and scrambled backward, but the reflection didn't vanish. It seemed to rise as if the water itself were lifting it up, forming a pale, shimmering shape just beneath the surface. And then, a voice, like water moving over stones, whispered from the lake. "You left me here, Claire." She ran. But that night, sleep offered no escape. Every sound, every drip of a leaky faucet, every whisper of wind through the eaves seemed to come from inside the house. At midnight, she woke to find a pool of dark water spreading beneath her bed. Her reflection in it smiled upside down, its eyes wide and unblinking. Her mother's lullaby returned, but this time it was inside her head, echoing like a memory she'd never actually had. She staggered outside, barefoot, drawn to the dock once more as if pulled by an invisible string. The mist parted, revealing a woman standing at the end, her mother, dripping and pale, but smiling. "Come, my darling," she said, her voice the sound of the lapping water. "It's time to go home." Aunt Mireille woke to an unnerving silence. Claire's bed was empty, the front door ajar. She rushed to the dock, her breath misting in the cold morning air. Claire was there, standing waist-deep in the lake, staring down at her own reflection. "Claire!" the old woman cried out, her voice cracking. The girl turned, but her eyes were pale and empty, her lips tinged with blue. Water streamed from her hair like endless tears. "She says I can stay now," Claire whispered, her voice strangely calm. "She says there's room." Mireille reached out a trembling hand, but as she did, the reflection in the water reached too, its cold fingers wrapping around her wrist. The pull was immense, dragging her toward the edge. Then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped. Claire was gone. The lake rippled once, then stilled into a perfect dark mirror. Days later, worried villagers found the dock empty and the house locked tight. Aunt Mireille was never seen again. But the lake had changed. Now, when people walked its shore at dusk, they swore they saw two women standing in the water, one young, one old, holding hands just beneath the surface. And when the wind fell still, the lake reflected not the sky, but faces, dozens of them, pale and waiting. Years later, hikers found the house, swallowed by vines and decay. Inside, on a dusty windowsill, sat a single photograph. A mother and daughter, standing together, smiling by the lake. But in the water's reflection, both of their eyes were wide open, and their smiles were wider, sharper. So if you ever visit L'Œil de Dieu on a windless night, when the water is so perfectly still, you can see yourself clear as day. Just don't wave, because sometimes the reflection waves back. Thank you so much for joining me on this chilling tale. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next descent into the darkness. Until next time, stay safe. In the sleepy village of Saint-Avril, a bridge has stood for centuries. It's a narrow, creaking thing, spanning a black river that smells of oil and decay. The locals call it Le Pont des Marionnettes, the Marionette Bridge. And no one, absolutely no one, crosses it after the sun goes down. Legend whispers of Etienne Verlot, a traveling puppet master who performed his final fateful show upon its planks. Ridiculed by his audience, he swore his puppets would dance forever. Then, he vanished into the river below, strings and all. Ever since, they say if you linger too long on the bridge, you can feel it. The gentle, insistent tug of invisible threads on your limbs. Lucia Moreau, a sharp-witted theater restorer from Paris, didn't believe in such tales. She arrived in Saint-Avril in the late autumn, hired to refurbish the remains of Verlot's old performance wagon, which had just been discovered near the riverbank. Fog clung to the cobblestone streets like a shroud, and the villagers watched her with silent, wary eyes as she passed. At the inn, the old keeper's hands trembled as he handed her the room key. "You're staying near the bridge?" he asked, his voice low. "Yes," Lucia replied confidently. "I'm studying Verlot's work for a restoration exhibit." The keeper's face tightened. "Then remember, mademoiselle, don't stop on the bridge at night. If you feel the pull, don't look back." Lucia offered a polite, dismissive laugh. "I'll try to keep that in mind." The next morning, she went to the site. The bridge was even more unsettling in person, its mossy planks warped like the spine of some ancient creature. Beside it, Verlot's wagon sat collapsed on one side, a forgotten relic. Inside, she found the remnants of his life's work, strings tangled like impossibly complex spiderwebs, cracked marionette heads with vacant glass eyes, and a journal, its pages half melted by water. She picked up one puppet, a dancer in a faded red dress. Despite its age and decay, the fabric felt strangely warm. As she manipulated it, the joints creaked with an odd resistance, as if something inside fought her movements. Unnerved, she set it down quickly. But then, she saw it. The wooden head turned slightly, all on its own. That evening, by the flickering light of a candle, Lucia began cleaning the pages of Verlot's journal. The script was elegant, precise, but as she read on, it grew increasingly desperate. An entry from March 2nd read, "They will not clap for me. They say my art is lifeless. But the strings listen when no one else does." Another, from March 10th. "The bridge hums beneath the boards. I tied my new strings there, let them dangle into the dark. The river breathes. It moves with me." The final entry she could decipher, dated March 14th, was just 6 words. "The puppets no longer need my hands." A shiver traced its way down Lucia's spine. She snapped the journal shut and poured herself a glass of wine, trying to shake off the chill. But then she heard it. Outside, the wind rattled the shutters, and from across the water came a faint, rhythmic creaking, like the sound of footsteps pacing slowly, methodically, back and forth across old wood. By her 3rd night in Saint-Avril, curiosity had won. Lucia walked down to the bridge, her lantern casting an eerie orange glow through the thick fog. The river murmured below, a dark, unseen presence. She took a deep breath and set one foot on the first plank, then another. The boards groaned under her weight, as if in protest. Halfway across, she stopped, her heart pounding in the suffocating silence. That's when she felt it. A tug at her wrist. At first, she thought her sleeve had caught on a nail. But when she lifted her hand, she saw it. A thin, silvery thread, as fine as spider silk, attached to her skin. It tightened. She gasped, trying to brush it away, but more appeared, latching onto her arms, her shoulders, her hair. The very air around her seemed to shimmer with these invisible filaments, pulling gently, insistently. And then, a whisper rose from beneath the planks, a voice like rustling leaves in cold water. "Dance for me." Panic seized her. Lucia stumbled backward, tearing at the threads, her lantern swinging wildly. She didn't stop running until she was safely on the bank. When she dared to look back, the bridge was empty, yet the planks still swayed, as if an unseen dancer was still moving upon them. She tried to leave the next day. She had to get out of Saint-Avril, but the only road out was flooded, cutting her off. Defeated, she returned to her work, telling herself she would finish quickly and escape as soon as the water receded. Inside the wagon, the dancer puppet was waiting right where she'd left it. But it was different. Its red dress was cleaner, the paint on its face glossier, as if someone had been carefully repairing it overnight. Her hands trembled as she reached out to pick it up. "Who's been?" she began to whisper. Its head tilted slightly. A new voice whispered back, a sound that seemed to vibrate through the strings and into her fingertips. "You have." She dropped the puppet, her heart hammering against her ribs, and fled back to the inn. That night, she dreamed she was on the bridge. Fog swirled around her, and shimmering strings descended from the clouds like a silver rain. attaching themselves to her wrists, her elbows, her jaw. Her body began to move, not by her own will, but gracefully, rhythmically, a perfect marionette's dance. She could feel her bones creaking with each unnatural movement, her lips pulled into a smile she did not command. And from the darkness beneath the bridge, Etienne Verlot's voice whispered, a sound of triumphant possession. "At last, my perfect puppet." She awoke with a gasp, her body drenched in a cold sweat. Her hands ached, and around her wrists were deep red marks, thin, neat lines, like the pressure from twine. It was the music that woke the villagers. Just after midnight, the faint, melancholic strains of a violin drifted from the direction of the bridge. Those brave enough to peer from their windows saw a lone lantern glowing upon the planks. And in its light, a figure was moving, a woman, dancing with a fluid, perfect rhythm, her limbs jerking with the unmistakable motion of a puppet. It was Lucia. Her face was serene, her eyes utterly empty. In the fog, thousands of strings shimmered, leading from her body up into the black, starless nothing. When the song reached its final, haunting note, she bowed deeply and simply vanished into the mist. By dawn, her lantern had washed ashore, its glass cracked. Weeks later, a fisherman stumbled upon Verlot's wagon, no longer a ruin but fully restored to its former glory. Inside, dozens of new marionettes hung from the ceiling, their wooden eyes bright, their clothes freshly painted. Each wore a small tag, a name written in elegant looping script. The very last one read, Lucia Moreau. As the fisherman reached out to touch it, he swore he saw its chest rise and fall, just slightly, as though it were taking a shallow, wooden breath. They say the Marionette Bridge still stands today, a dark silhouette against the French sky, though no one dares cross it at night. The fog there seems different, coiling like strings, tightening around any who wander too close. Some travelers report hearing music, faint violin notes drifting across the water. Others swear they see silhouettes dancing above the river, their movements graceful but wrong, guided by hands that are not there. And sometimes, if you linger on the riverbank long enough, you might just see her, a woman in a red dress, turning toward you with a painted smile and the faint glint of silver thread in her eyes. She'll raise a delicate hand, beckon you softly, and whisper, "Your turn to dance." Thanks for joining me on this chilling journey. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more tales from the shadows. Stay safe out there. There was a time when children's laughter filled Weatherby Fields, their games circling the old stone well. But that time had long since passed. Now, the well sits sealed under a ring of rusted iron plates, a forgotten secret beneath weeds and moss. But secrets rarely stay buried. Every so often, people walking by claim they hear something rising from the depths, soft murmurs like distant voices calling for help. The villagers dismiss it as the wind whistling through the cracks. The elders, however, shake their heads and say it's just the well, remembering everything that's been thrown into it. And 16-year-old Henry Coates was about to find out which of them was right. It began, as so many nightmares do, with a simple dare. Henry was restless, simmering with an anger at a world that had dealt him little but grief. 3 years ago, his father had vanished without a trace, last seen near these very fields after a bad storm. Some gossiped that he'd run off, leaving his family behind. Others whispered a darker theory, that he'd fallen into the well before it was sealed. So when his friends, fueled by teenage bravado, dared him to break open the iron plate and listen to the ghosts, Henry didn't hesitate. He just stared them down and said, "If my dad's down there, maybe he'll finally answer me." They laughed, a nervous, thrilled sound that echoed under the silver autumn moon as they carried crowbars toward the forbidden circle of stone. The plate came off easier than anyone expected. Rust crumbled like dry leaves, and the bolts let out a pained squeal. A damp breath of air rose from the opening, a smell that was cold, metallic, and faintly, sickeningly sweet. Henry clicked on his flashlight and aimed the beam into the abyss. It barely touched the sides, let alone the bottom. The shaft seemed endless, a throat of slick, dark stone, with the occasional glint of something wet catching the light. One of his friends nudged him. "Go on," he whispered. "Say something." Henry leaned close, the damp air chilling his face. His voice, when it came out, was a soft, trembling echo. "Dad? Are you there?" For a moment there was only silence. And then, impossibly faintly, a reply drifted up. "Henry." He jerked back, his heart hammering against his ribs. "Did you hear that?" he asked, turning to his friends. But they were already backing away, their faces pale in the moonlight, eyes wide with terror. The voice came again, clearer this time, pulling him back to the edge. "Henry, help me." Against all reason, against every instinct screaming at him to run, he grabbed the rope ladder they'd brought. As he started to climb down, his friends shouted his name, their voices a mixture of fear and disbelief. But he didn't look back. He was going to get his father. The air grew colder with every rung he descended. The steady drip, drip, drip of water echoed from somewhere far below. The walls seemed to press in on him, the rough stone slick and cold beneath his trembling fingers. He was maybe halfway down when his flashlight flickered. He banged it against his palm, once, twice, and then froze. Something moved below him, a shadow sliding across the stone just at the edge of his wavering light. Then a whisper, so close it felt like it was breathed right beside his ear. "You shouldn't have come back." He whipped his head around, looking down. Nothing. He looked up. The circle of moonlight above him was shrinking, the silhouettes of his friends gone. "Guys?" he called out, his voice cracking. There was no answer, just the hollow echo of his own fear. He kept going, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs, until his boots finally hit the soft mud at the bottom. The well widened here, opening into a small, shallow cavern. In the unsteady beam of his flashlight, something glistened. He moved closer. Metal, bone, and torn scraps of fabric. It was his father's old work jacket, half buried in the muck. "Dad?" he whispered, his voice catching in his throat. The darkness in front of him seemed to shift, to move. And then a voice, carried on the dripping echoes, began to form words. "Henry, my boy, you came." He spun around, the flashlight beam cutting wildly through the oppressive black. "Dad?" The voice continued, filled with a sorrow that seemed ancient. "So long, so dark down here. Help me." The light swept across the cavern walls and froze on a figure slumped against the stone. It was his father, or what was left of him. His clothes were soaked and tattered, his face pale and swollen, his eyes like two black marbles staring out from deep, dark sockets. But when he spoke, his mouth didn't move. The sound wasn't coming from him. It was coming from the walls. The very stones themselves seemed to tremble with each word. "You opened it again. It doesn't like that." A cold dread washed over Henry. "Who?" he whispered. The voice from the walls answered, "The one that listens." Just then, a low rumble shook the earth beneath his feet. The water at his ankles began to ripple, disturbed from below. Something vast and wet stirred in the darkness beneath the mud, pushing upward. "It wants to remember you now," his father's voice echoed. "Run." Henry scrambled for the rope ladder. It was gone, pulled up. Panic seized him. His flashlight slipped from his grasp, splashing into the dark water with a fizzle of light. Then, from the blackness beneath, a hand rose. It wasn't his father's. This hand was longer, boneless, its fingers like wet, pale reeds dripping with mud. It reached for him. He screamed, clawing at the slick stone wall, his nails tearing as he tried to find a hold. The hand touched his ankle. The cold wasn't just physical. It was a jolt of ice and memory. Flashes of faces he'd known his whole life flooded his mind, their mouths moving in silent, desperate pleas. "Let me go!" he cried out. But the voice from below only laughed, a sound that bounced off the walls, multiplying, distorting, until it was no longer one voice, but hundreds, all speaking as one. "We are what the well remembers." Then, The world went black. At dawn, his friends returned, their bravado replaced by guilt and a gnawing fear. The rope ladder lay coiled at the well's mouth. Henry's flashlight floated on the murky surface of the water, its light flickering weakly. But there was no body, no sound, just a faint, almost imperceptible echo that seemed to whisper his name. The villagers sealed the well again that very day, this time with cement and steel and a hastily painted sign that read, "Danger, unstable ground, do not approach." But sealing the stone didn't stop the sound. Weeks later, Henry's mother's phone rang late at night. A voice, faint and filled with static, came through the line. "Mom, it's me. Don't cry. I'm okay." She froze, gripping the receiver. "Henry?" The voice replied, "I'm home. Come outside." She ran to the front door and threw it open, her heart soaring with hope. But there was no one there, only the lonely wind and the faint drip of water from the eaves. She slowly picked the phone back up. The line was still open, and from it came the unmistakable sound of trickling water, echoing endlessly as if the call was coming from deep, deep underground. Years passed. Weatherby Fields grew wild again. A new generation of teenagers dared each other to stand near the sealed plate and listen. Most heard nothing but the wind. But sometimes when the night was still and the moon hung low and heavy in the sky, you could hear them, whispers, rising through the cracks in the cement. Some said it was Henry, forever trapped. Others said it was the well itself, lonely, and calling out for new voices to remember. The last person to hear it was a construction worker, tasked with clearing brush near the site for a new development. He later told his foreman he'd heard laughter, faint, distant, almost childlike, and then something that made his blood run cold. A voice whispering his name. When the worker didn't return from his break, the crew went looking for him. They found his tools scattered by the old stone ring. The cement, they noticed, had a fresh crack running through it, a dark opening into the earth. They peered down and saw only darkness. One of them, trying to gauge the depth, dropped a pebble into the crack. They all swore it never hit the bottom. Later, another man from the crew claimed he de-recorded something strange on his phone while he was near the well. He played it back for the police. The audio file was mostly static, the sound of dripping water, and, almost hidden beneath the noise, a soft voice repeating the same words over and over. One more to remember. The file ends abruptly with a loud splash. No one knows what it was. The well was sealed again, this time with layers of cement and heavy iron chains. Today, Weatherby Fields is quiet. A permanent sign warns hikers to keep away. But if you stand there long enough, if the air is perfectly still and you were brave enough to whisper your own name into the wind, you might just hear it answered. Softer, deeper, older, coming from the ground right beneath your feet. And once the well knows your name, it never ever forgets. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more tales from the shadows. Stay safe out there.